The cold was more than just an inconvenience in medieval Europe. It was a relentless adversary. As the sun's warmth diminished, a suffocating chill seeped into every corner of the land, and no place felt safe from it. Castles, imposing structures built from stone, were supposed to provide protection from invaders. Yet in winter, they became fortresses against something far more insidious: the biting cold. The great walls of castles, designed to keep enemies at bay, were no match for the frost that crept inside, claiming rooms, halls, and towers. In this unforgiving climate, warmth was a matter of survival. But how could people survive the bitter winters with so little? Imagine the weight of an endless winter hanging over you. The snow, thick and unyielding, piled up against the stone walls outside, while inside, the chills seeped in through every crack, every crevice. The fires crackled in the hearths, if there was enough wood to keep them burning, but it was never enough. The warmth was fleeting. Castles weren't designed with comfort in mind. Their walls were thick, meant to keep enemies out, not warmth in. And yet, inside these vast stone halls, families, soldiers, and servants huddled, all yearning for just a little more heat to stave off the bitter cold. The problem was simple, yet profound. Wood, the primary fuel for warmth, was scarce. It wasn't like the woodlands of today, where an endless supply could be gathered with ease. In medieval times, forests were not only difficult to access, but were often fiercely guarded by those in power. Trees were worth more than they seemed, more than just a source of heat. They were the timber for building, the material for ships and structures. Wood, in essence, was a luxury. To burn it for warmth was to consume precious resources, and that was a cost no one could afford indefinitely. So, what did the people do?
How did they survive the brutal winter months when the very walls that protected them from the outside world seemed to trap them in a fortress of ice? The answer, though it may seem simple, was far more complex than one might imagine. Castles, for all their splendor and strength, were places of ingenious survival. The people inside were forced to use every scrap of knowledge they had about the land, the air, and the materials at their disposal to fend off the cold. As the fire burned low and the wind howled through narrow windows, one question loomed in the minds of all those inside. How did these castles stay warm when firewood was so scarce? The answer lies not in what we might expect, but in the ingenuity of the people who built and lived within these stone walls.
Wood was the lifeblood of winter survival in medieval castles. Without it, even the most formidable fortresses would crumble under the weight of the cold. Yet even as castles grew taller and their walls more impenetrable, wood remained a limited and expensive resource. The harshness of winter wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a threat that demanded a solution, one that required more than just stacking firewood in every corner. The logistics of securing and storing wood were a problem unto themselves. Castles with their towering stone walls were often situated in remote locations, far from the towns where wood could be gathered. For firewood to reach these isolated fortresses, it had to be transported over long distances. The process was labor-intensive, requiring not only manpower, but also wagons and carts that could withstand the weight of heavy logs over rough roads. And yet, even when the wood arrived, it was never enough to keep the castle warm for the entire winter. The cold months stretched on for weeks, sometimes months, with little relief. What's even more intriguing is the delicate balance that had to be struck. Wood was precious, and to burn it in excess was considered wasteful. Even with the logs stacked high, it could take hours to heat a single room. Castles had to prioritize where the warmth went. The Great Hall, the heart of castle life, would be kept as warm as possible, while smaller rooms and corridors often remained bitterly cold. People had to live within the confines of this heating system, adapting their daily routines to accommodate the scarcity of warmth. But here's the twist. Despite the scarcity, firewood wasn't the only answer. As strange as it may seem, firewood was just a piece of the puzzle, and medieval builders were acutely aware that they needed to think beyond the traditional methods of heating. They weren't just stacking wood and lighting fires. They were building with an understanding of heat, airflow, and insulation. The ingenuity of medieval engineers was truly remarkable. Castles weren't just places where people lived. They were carefully crafted machines designed to trap warmth and conserve it in ways that would be unthinkable to us today. How did they do it? How did they manage to keep the castle warm even when the firewood was running low? What secrets did these architects hide in the very walls, floors, and ceilings that seemed so cold and imposing? The answer, though buried in the stone, is just waiting to be uncovered. And as we delve deeper into the heart of these ancient fortresses, you may begin to realize that the cold we so often associate with castles wasn't always what it seemed. What if the castles themselves held the key to warmth, hidden in plain sight? Medieval castles were not just fortresses designed to keep out invaders. They were finely crafted havens meant to protect their inhabitants from one of nature's most relentless adversaries, the cold. Architects of the time understood that the elements could be as deadly as any enemy, and that to survive, the very buildings they constructed would need to combat the bitter chill that accompanied the long winters. But how could stone, heavy and unyielding, be used to trap warmth and shield people from the freezing temperatures? The answer was hidden in the very design of the castles themselves. The first and most obvious feature that came into play was the material itself, stone. Though it might seem counterintuitive to use stone in a world where warmth was a precious commodity, it was the material's ability to store heat that made it invaluable. Thick stone walls, often several feet deep, were designed not just to withstand sieges, but to act as a kind of thermal battery. Stone can absorb heat over the course of the day, and then slowly release it as the temperatures drop at night. But to maximize this effect, castles weren't built haphazardly. The layout, orientation, and choice of materials all played crucial roles in harnessing the warmth the castle had to offer. One of the key principles medieval architects understood was that heat rises. It's a simple law of physics, but one that few could exploit to such remarkable effect. In castles, the upper reaches, the high vaulted ceilings of the Great Hall, for instance, were the places where warmth naturally accumulated. These ceilings, with their towering arches and open spaces, allowed hot air to gather at the top of the room, creating a pocket of warmth that could spread throughout the space. But that was only part of the equation. The lower parts of the castle, where people actually lived, needed to be kept warm as well. So, architects designed smaller, intimate rooms with lower ceilings that could trap heat more efficiently. The layout wasn't random. It was a deliberate attempt to create pockets of warmth that could support life through the cold months. The placement of windows was equally important. Medieval windows were small, narrow openings in the stone that minimized the escape of warmth. Not only did they limit the amount of cold air entering the building, but they also served to trap the heat inside. While these windows may have seemed dim, they were intentionally designed to allow only the necessary amount of sunlight to penetrate the stone walls, helping to heat the building while still maintaining privacy and security. But the true genius of medieval castle architecture lay in the subtle details. The strategic use of materials was key. Floors were often made of thick, insulating stone, or even covered with woven rugs to trap the warmth beneath. Vaulted ceilings with their curvature help direct the rising heat back down into the room, circulating it throughout the space. Every element, from the thickness of the walls to the structure of the ceilings, was crafted with the understanding that the castle needed to hold onto warmth, not just withstand attacks. What if we told you that the design of these fortresses wasn't just for defense, but for survival? Every inch of the stone, every curve of the ceiling, and every narrow window was a calculated decision to create a space that could provide refuge against the harshest of winters. Castles weren't just built to keep enemies out. They were designed to keep warmth in, turning the fortress into a refuge in the most literal sense. But this wasn't enough. Even with all the thought put into the design, medieval engineers knew that to truly survive the winters, there had to be something more, a hidden layer of ingenuity beneath the surface, one that would soon reveal its secrets.
The heart of the medieval castle wasn't just a place where battles were planned or riches were stored. It was the Great Hall, a vast, open space where life happened, where people gathered for feasts, and where the warmth of the fire served as both a social and physical anchor. As you step into the Great Hall of a medieval castle, you might be struck by the towering height of the room, its vaulted ceilings stretching far above. The space felt open, grand, even awe-inspiring, but it also held a secret. The very design of this room was part of the strategy to keep the entire castle warm. The Great Hall was more than just a place of gathering. It was the castle's furnace, its beating heart. Here, warmth wasn't just for the elite or the powerful, it was for everyone. The fire at the center of the room, often an enormous hearth, would burn day and night. It wasn't just for cooking or light. It was there to provide warmth for everyone who called the castle home. But why was this hall so open and expansive, the focal point of warmth in a place otherwise designed for defense? The high ceilings of the Great Hall were not a stylistic choice. They were a deliberate attempt to manipulate the flow of heat. Heat rises, so the architects cleverly designed the space so that the upper reaches of the room could trap the rising warmth. It wasn't just a matter of having a fire. It was about making sure the fire's warmth could circulate through the air and fill the room. The grandiosity of the room wasn't just for show. It was an architectural trick to ensure the heat would gather in the air above the lower floors, which could then be felt more comfortably throughout the day. In this way, the Great Hall became a vital space, a central gathering place where warmth and community coexisted. But the true genius lay in the placement of the hearth. Situated at the center of the room, the hearth became both a source of immediate warmth and a way to keep the rest of the castle habitable. The flames flickered in the hearth, their warmth slowly radiating throughout the hall, and the heat they generated worked its way into the walls and ceilings, spreading out to the surrounding rooms. This wasn't just a fire for light, it was the engine that powered the entire castle's defense against the winter cold. The location of the hearth was crucial. It wasn't just about creating warmth, it was about creating the right kind of warmth. Fireplaces were built into the design of the castle, not only to heat the hall, but to distribute heat across the entire structure. The air, warmed by the flames, would rise and spread out, touching every corner of the room. It wasn't just a place to gather, it was a strategic space where heat and people intermingled, a vital part of the survival blueprint of the entire castle. As you listen to the crackling of a fire, imagine it not just as a flickering flame, but as the life force of the castle itself, working tirelessly to keep the cold at bay. The Great Hall, a place for banquets and gatherings, also served a dual role, a space to foster community and warmth, an essential part of surviving the harsh winters that often seemed endless. The warmth it provided wasn't just physical,
It was the heartbeat of the castle, a warmth that pulsed through the stone and kept the chill at bay. And yet, this warmth was fleeting. There had to be more hidden methods at work, secrets buried deep within the structure that ensured the cold would never conquer. This was only the beginning of the mysteries hidden within the castle walls. The Great Hall was just one part of the larger puzzle, one that would soon reveal the hidden fire techniques used to keep entire castles warm, even when the wood was running low and the winter was unyielding.
When you think of a medieval hearth, what comes to mind? A roaring fire, its flames flickering in a massive stone fireplace, casting a warm glow throughout the room. It's easy to imagine the hearth as just a source of light and warmth, but in reality, its role was far more sophisticated than that. The hearth wasn't merely a simple fire. It was a carefully designed system meant to do much more than keep the room cozy. In fact, it was often engineered in such a way that it would do its job without drawing attention to itself, working its magic invisibly, hidden in plain sight. The most striking feature of a medieval hearth, one that most people overlook, is its connection to the chimney system. Fire and smoke were traditionally inseparable, yet the challenge medieval architects faced was to ensure that the smoke didn't overwhelm the interior of the castle. Imagine a room filled with smoke that couldn't escape. It would be impossible to live in. To prevent this, chimneys were built in ingenious ways, ensuring the smoke would rise up and exit the building without polluting the air inside. But it wasn't just about getting rid of the smoke. It was about harnessing the heat. The hearths were strategically designed to spread warmth, not just locally but across entire rooms, and, in some cases, even multiple floors. Unlike modern fireplaces, which can often be wasteful with heat, medieval hearths were built to conserve and distribute it. The fire itself was concealed in ways that allowed the heat to radiate outward, while keeping the flames hidden from sight. This concept, known as the hidden fire, was a key part of medieval castle design. It was an approach that kept the fire's warmth in the room without sacrificing the space or exposing it to the risk of fire hazards. One of the most ingenious features of these hearths was their construction in conjunction with flues. These flues were built within the walls, running like hidden veins, capturing heat from the fire and circulating it throughout the building. They were small, often unseen by the occupants of the castle, but they were vital in turning heat from a temporary phenomenon into a constant, life-sustaining presence within the stone walls. The smoke would rise up through the chimney, while the heat it generated would be absorbed by the flues, circulating throughout the building and slowly warming it from within. What if we told you that fire wasn't always visible in medieval castles? That the source of warmth, hidden in plain sight, worked silently behind the walls to create a climate of comfort. Castles, for all their harsh stone exteriors, were designed to offer refuge from the cold, not just through thick walls, but through the very fire that burned within. These hearths, often concealed from view, were part of a clever, almost mystical system designed to keep the castle warm without ever drawing attention to the fire itself. This concept of hidden fire is just the beginning of the story. While the hearths worked tirelessly to keep rooms warm, they were only a small part of a much larger invisible system. A system that could circulate warmth across the entire structure, ensuring that the cold never fully claimed the castle. And it's this hidden network of warmth, hidden in the stone and beneath the floors, that holds the next layer of mystery waiting to be uncovered. The hearths may have been the heart of the castle's warmth, but the true magic of medieval heating was hidden beneath the floorboards. Beneath the thick stone floors, channels of warmth quietly moved through the castle, working tirelessly to ensure that no room was left in the cold. These were not just simple ducts, nor were they passive spaces left to chance.
These hidden chambers were designed with precision, intended to carry warmth through the castle as if they were veins pumping lifeblood into the building itself. What you couldn't see when walking through a medieval castle was just as important as what you could. The heat generated by the hearths wasn't just left to float aimlessly in the air. It was captured and channeled, moving through flues that snaked throughout the walls, into rooms that might have otherwise stayed cold. These flues were essentially hidden passageways for warmth, built into the very framework of the castle to carry heat from the central hearths to places far beyond the reach of the flames. Beneath the stone floors, another secret lay. Some castles were built with a system that modern eyes would scarcely believe: underfloor heating. The heat from the fires would travel through hollowed-out spaces beneath the floors, warming the stone from below. The stone, so cold to the touch, would absorb the heat and release it gradually, creating an even, gentle warmth that radiated up into the room. Unlike the fire that could only heat the space directly around it, this underground system spread warmth to every corner, ensuring that even the most distant rooms stayed bearable during the winter months. But that wasn't all. There were chambers hidden from view that served as insulated spaces for key parts of the castle. These rooms weren't for everyday use. They were reserved for places that needed to be kept at a precise temperature. Wine cellars, for example, needed to stay cool, but rooms like the Lord's chambers had to stay warm. These insulated spaces were sealed off from the rest of the castle, ensuring that heat could be concentrated in the areas that needed it most. The warm air that moved through the walls and floors was directed toward these key rooms, making sure that those who mattered most could find comfort, even in the harshest of winters. Beneath the stone and beyond the visible hearths, the castle was alive with hidden warmth. Flues, passageways, and underfloor heating all worked in harmony to create an environment where the cold was always kept at bay. These systems were the unsung heroes of medieval castle life, quietly performing their work, often unseen and unnoticed. Yet without them, the castles would have been little more than stone shells, echoing with the sounds of the wind and the cold. As we explore these hidden chambers, it's clear that the architects of medieval castles weren't just concerned with defense or grandeur. They were deeply invested in creating environments that could withstand the elements, environments where warmth could be maintained through clever, almost magical systems. And as we move forward, we'll delve deeper into the science behind these hidden technologies, discovering how medieval engineers harnessed the forces of heat, stone, and air to create the warm, habitable spaces we now look back on in awe. The warmth of these castles wasn't just a result of fire. It was a carefully designed system, a masterpiece of engineering, built into the very bones of the structure. Stone, a material cold to the touch, might seem like the last thing you'd want surrounding you in the dead of winter. And yet, in the medieval world, it was the very foundation of warmth. When we think of stone, we often imagine it as an unyielding, lifeless object. But in the hands of skilled builders, it became something far more remarkable, something capable of absorbing, storing, and slowly releasing heat in a way that would have seemed almost magical to those living at the time. So, how did medieval architects turn cold, hard stone into a fortress of warmth? The answer lies in the science of heat retention, a concept that medieval builders grasped long before it was understood by modern science. The key is the thermal mass of stone. Thermal mass refers to the ability of a material to absorb and store heat. Think of it as a battery, but instead of electricity, it stores warmth. Stone, when exposed to heat from the fire, would absorb that warmth, and as the temperature around it dropped, the stone would gradually release the heat it had stored. This slow release of warmth helped to stabilize the temperature within the castle, especially during the cold nights when firewood was scarce, and the fires in the hearths would burn low. The specific properties of different types of stone and brick used in the construction of these castles played a huge role in how effectively they retained heat. Limestones and sandstones, for example, are particularly good at holding on to heat. When these stones were used in castle walls, they essentially acted as a heat reservoir. In contrast, granite and other denser stones might not have had the same insulating ability, but they were incredibly durable, capable of withstanding centuries of wear and tear. The medieval architects knew which materials would work best for trapping warmth and designed their structures accordingly. It wasn't just the choice of material that made these buildings so effective at retaining heat. The thickness of the walls was another critical factor. Thick, massive walls, often several feet deep, were built not just for defense, but to enhance this natural process of heat retention. These walls acted as a buffer, absorbing heat from the fires and slowly releasing it into the interior of the castle. Even if the fire in the hearth began to die down, the warmth stored in the stone would continue to radiate outward, keeping the cold at bay for longer periods. But how did the stone manage to do this so efficiently? The answer lies in the physics of conduction. Heat moves from warmer objects to cooler ones, and the stone acted as a conduit for this heat. When a fire was burning, the stone in close proximity would heat up. As the warmth spread through the stone, it would travel deeper into the structure, dispersing the heat throughout the building. This process created a constant, though subtle, flow of warmth throughout the castle, making the building far more comfortable than we might expect. Stone may feel cold to the touch, but in the right conditions, it could hold heat like a battery. The genius of medieval builders was in their understanding of these principles long before they had a scientific explanation for them. By using stone's natural properties to their advantage, they were able to create structures that not only withstood the test of time, but also kept their inhabitants warm during the coldest winters. In the end, these castles weren't just fortresses against invaders. They were fortresses against the relentless chill of the outside world, cleverly engineered to trap and store warmth in the most unlikely of materials. Now, let's take a step beyond theory and into the tangible world of medieval architecture, where these principles were applied in iconic castles that still stand today. Castles like the Château de Versailles and Edinburgh Castle are prime examples of how architects harness the power of stone and design to maintain warmth throughout the cold months. At the Château de Versailles, the grand palace built for King Louis XIV, the emphasis on comfort and warmth was as much a part of its design as its grandeur. While it might be known for its opulent halls and sprawling gardens, what many don't realize is that the palace was also a masterclass in thermal engineering. The stone walls, though beautiful, served a much more practical purpose. Their massive thickness allowed them to absorb the heat from the large fireplaces that dotted the palace, slowly releasing warmth throughout the day and night. This natural heating system worked in tandem with other methods, like strategically placed chimneys and flues, to ensure that rooms remained comfortably warm, even in the dead of winter. Edinburgh Castle, perched on a volcanic rock, offers another fascinating example of how medieval builders used stone to their advantage. The castle's thick stone walls were not just built for defense, but to trap and retain heat. Inside, large fireplaces were placed in strategic locations, allowing the heat to spread through the stone, warming the rooms that were furthest from the fire. The vaulted ceilings of the Great Hall were another important design feature, allowing the rising heat to collect in the high arches and then slowly radiate downwards into the living spaces below. The castle's clever use of stone ensured that its inhabitants could survive the brutal Scottish winters, even when firewood was in short supply. These real-world examples illustrate the brilliance of medieval castle architecture. The stone wasn't just a defensive feature, it was an integral part of the castle's ability to stay warm and habitable during the long, harsh winters. The walls, floors, and ceilings worked in concert to absorb, store, and release heat in ways that would be difficult to replicate today. What was once seen as just a basic material for building was transformed into something far more sophisticated, a heat-retaining agent capable of making the cold months bearable. Imagine stepping into a castle and feeling the warmth of its stone walls, not magic, but the result of centuries of clever engineering. These ancient methods weren't just a reflection of medieval knowledge. They were a testament to the understanding of natural forces long before modern science fully grasped them. Castles weren't just fortresses. They were warm, inviting homes, designed with the harsh realities of medieval winters in mind. And as we move into the next chapter, we'll see how these techniques evolved over time, leading to even more advanced heating systems that would continue to shape the way people lived in these majestic structures. In the early days of medieval castles, before the advent of sophisticated heating methods like flues and underfloor heating, people had to rely on much simpler and far less efficient methods to stay warm. Castles were still relatively new, and while their massive stone walls were excellent for defense, they offered little in terms of insulation. For warmth, the primary tool was fire. But as you might imagine, relying on an open flame to heat a vast stone structure wasn't the most effective solution. The most common form of heat was the fireplace, usually situated in the Great Hall or the living quarters of the castle. These fireplaces, often massive, were designed to hold large quantities of wood to keep the flames burning for hours. The challenge, however, was that while the fire would provide warmth to the immediate area, it did little to distribute heat beyond the hearth. The air around the fire would become warm, but the rest of the room, let alone the rest of the castle, remained cold. The heat would quickly dissipate, and the large stone walls would absorb the warmth, only to slowly release it when the temperature dropped again. In these early castles, warmth was fleeting, and there was no real way to store or circulate it efficiently. Then there were braziers, small portable fire vessels that could be moved from room to room, offering a modicum of warmth in specific areas. They were often placed in the middle of a room, where people would huddle around the small heat they could provide. But like the larger hearths, braziers only served to warm the immediate surroundings, and the cold stone walls around them quickly siphoned away any heat. And then, of course, there was the constant problem of firewood. Castles were often situated in remote locations, far from the towns where firewood could be easily sourced. Transporting large quantities of wood into the castle was a monumental task, and wood was a precious commodity, used not only for heating, but for building, cooking, and forging. The constant need for firewood to maintain warmth during the long winters posed a significant logistical challenge. Not only was it expensive, but it also had to be carefully rationed to ensure that the castle would survive through the cold months. The early heating systems in castles were, at best, temporary solutions, effective only in the areas directly surrounding the fires and completely ineffective in many of the rooms further from the hearth. As a result, life inside these early stone fortresses was often a struggle against the cold. The cold would creep into every corner, and no matter how much wood was burned, it felt as though there was never quite enough warmth to go around. These limitations, though frustrating, served as the foundation for the advancements that followed. The inefficiencies of these early systems were not lost on the builders and architects of the time. Instead, they sparked a search for better methods to harness the heat generated by the fire, leading to a series of innovations that would drastically improve the way castles stayed warm. But how could heat be more effectively distributed? And how could firewood be conserved for longer periods? That's where the real breakthroughs would begin. As the limitations of early heating systems became apparent, medieval engineers began to experiment with new methods of heat distribution. The solution, though simple in theory, would change the way castles were heated forever: the invention of the flue system. The idea was deceptively simple: create a way for smoke to escape the building while simultaneously using that very same smoke to circulate warmth throughout the castle. The flue system wasn't just about clearing out smoke. It was about maximizing the heat generated by the fire and spreading it as efficiently as possible. At its core, the flue system was a series of channels and ducts built into the walls of the castle. These channels, often built out of brick or stone, were designed to carry the smoke up from the hearth, venting it safely out of the building. But they didn't just serve to remove the smoke. They also allowed the heat generated by the fire to be absorbed by the walls and distributed throughout the structure. By incorporating these hidden flues into the architecture, the warmth created by the fire could be circulated through the building, extending the reach of the fire far beyond its immediate surroundings. Chimney flues, in particular, played a vital role. In earlier castles, the smoke from the fire would simply escape through an open hole in the roof, or sometimes the smoke would even fill the room. However, with the introduction of the chimney flue, smoke could be channeled through a series of controlled passages, drawing the smoke upwards and out of the building, without allowing the heat to escape with it. The heat was instead captured by the walls, where it would slowly seep out, warming the rooms connected to the flue system. This was a significant breakthrough. The flue system allowed castles to maintain warmth much more efficiently than before, without the need for an ever-increasing amount of firewood. The fire itself, though still the primary source of heat, no longer needed to be the sole method of keeping the castle warm. Instead, it became part of a much larger, integrated system that used the structure of the building to redistribute warmth more effectively. And yet, even with these advancements, the problem of warmth was far from solved. The flue system was a game-changer, but it was still dependent on the fire as its central source of heat. The next evolution in castle heating would take this idea even further, expanding on the notion of maximizing heat retention and distribution. In the coming years, further innovations would lead to underfloor heating systems and more intricate heating methods, all designed to make the cold months more bearable in the castles that had long been the domain of kings and warriors. These new systems were not only about comfort, they were about survival. The flue system marked the beginning of a much larger revolution in how castles were heated, one that would continue to evolve and improve for centuries to come. And as these systems grew more advanced, the cold would no longer be the enemy of life inside the castle. It would become a force that could be controlled, channeled, and, most importantly, conquered. Imagine stepping into a castle, a place of stone walls and cold, imposing corridors. Now picture yourself walking through that space, only to feel a warmth surrounding you, a subtle heat that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. But here's the mystery: no fireplace in sight, no visible hearth. Where is the warmth coming from? The answer, it turns out, is concealed fireplaces, hidden sources of fire that were cleverly integrated into the architecture of medieval castles. These fireplaces weren't meant to be noticed. They were tucked away, often built into the very fabric of the walls, or hidden in small alcoves where their flames would not be immediately visible. The fire, though it might not be in plain view, would radiate heat throughout the castle, making rooms more comfortable without consuming valuable space. These concealed fireplaces were an essential part of the effort to efficiently heat vast, cold stone structures. The design was ingenious. Instead of taking up the room's precious space with a large traditional fireplace, builders created small, discreet chambers that allowed the fire to burn inside the stone itself. The heat would then seep into the walls, warming the rooms connected to those walls without the need for a constant flame in the center of the room. These hidden fires worked tirelessly, creating warmth that extended far beyond the reach of a visible hearth. What makes this strategy even more remarkable is how it helped conserve firewood. Burning wood in traditional hearths could quickly consume a limited supply, especially in the depths of winter. But with concealed fireplaces, heat could be stored in the stone itself, allowing the fire to burn more efficiently and for longer periods. The flames were no longer just feeding into the air directly around them. Instead, they would feed into the stone, which absorbed the heat like a sponge. Over time, this would create an ongoing supply of warmth,
even when the fire itself was no longer burning. These hidden fireplaces were more than just practical solutions. They were feats of architectural innovation. Medieval engineers understood that stone had the ability to absorb and store heat, and they cleverly used this to their advantage. By embedding fires within the walls, they created a system that was more efficient, more discreet, and, most importantly, better at retaining warmth over long periods. The beauty of these concealed fireplaces is that they were not just a way to heat a room, but a way to harness the natural properties of stone to make the entire castle more comfortable. Imagine a cold winter night, the fire quietly burning in a hidden alcove, radiating warmth through the stone, spreading its heat into every corner of the castle without ever being seen. These fireplaces were the unsung heroes of castle warmth, invisible yet essential, working behind the scenes to keep everyone comfortable. And yet, despite these hidden marvels, the question remains: how did this heat spread beyond the walls? How did it make its way to the farthest corners of the castle, even to rooms that didn't have a hidden fire of their own? The answer to that puzzle lies not just in the fireplaces themselves, but in the architecture that was built around them, an intricate system designed to channel heat in ways we can only begin to understand. Deep within the thick stone walls of a castle, there were hidden spaces, chambers that no ordinary visitor would ever see. These secret rooms weren't for storing treasure or food. They were integral to the castle's warmth. These concealed chambers were designed to act as heat batteries, absorbing and storing the warmth generated by the fire and slowly releasing it to maintain a comfortable temperature throughout the castle. These secret rooms, often built into the thickest parts of the castle's walls, were the key to surviving the harshest winters. They were designed with one purpose in mind: to trap heat and release it gradually, like the walls of the castle themselves. These rooms, though hidden, were essential components of the castle's heating system, allowing the warmth to radiate even after the fire had long since gone out. What made these rooms so effective was the way they were integrated into the building's structure. Built in the areas that naturally absorbed heat, such as the interior stone walls, they acted as reservoirs of warmth. When the fire burned, the heat was absorbed by the walls and stored in these hidden chambers, which were insulated and sealed off from the rest of the building. As the temperature outside dropped and the fires within the hearths burned low, the stored heat would slowly seep out, warming the rooms connected to the chamber. In many ways, these secret rooms were the unsung champions of the castle's heating system. They worked silently, often unnoticed by the inhabitants, but their role was indispensable. While the hearths and concealed fireplaces provided immediate warmth, it was these chambers that allowed the castle to retain warmth over long periods of time, even when firewood was scarce and the fires were no longer burning. The design of these secret rooms was a marvel of medieval ingenuity. By building these rooms into the stone, the architects took advantage of the thermal mass of the material.
Stone, as we've seen, has the ability to absorb and store heat, and these chambers acted as the perfect medium for that purpose. They would store heat during the day when the fire was burning bright, and release it at night when the cold was at its most unforgiving. These secret chambers weren't just built for practicality, they were designed with precision. The rooms were often located near the most important areas of the castle, such as the Lord's chambers or the Great Hall, ensuring that the rooms most in need of warmth received it. These chambers also often had special access points, allowing them to remain sealed off from the rest of the castle, preserving the heat stored inside them. What's even more intriguing is that these chambers weren't just a feature of the largest castles. In fact, they were found in many castles across medieval Europe, especially those that were built in particularly cold regions, like the castles of Scotland and Scandinavia. They were a testament to the resourcefulness of medieval builders, who understood the importance of conserving heat and maintaining warmth during the harshest seasons. Could these secret rooms be the true heart of the castle's warmth? Perhaps. While the hearths and fireplaces provided the fire, it was these hidden chambers that ensured the castle could survive the cold long after the flames had been extinguished. And as the technology behind these chambers evolved, so too did the systems used to distribute and store heat, eventually leading to even more advanced methods of heating that would change the way castles were built and lived in forever. As we move forward, we will explore the next layer of this technological evolution, the integration of underfloor heating, a system that would revolutionize the way warmth was distributed throughout a castle. What if the answer to staying warm in a medieval castle wasn't an invention from the medieval period at all? What if it was a rediscovery of an ancient Roman technique, one that had been buried for centuries before being brought back to life in the cold stone halls of medieval fortresses? This is the story of the hypercourse system, a remarkable underfloor heating method that, though rooted in ancient Rome, would go on to transform the way medieval castles were heated. The hypercourse system was originally developed by the Romans around the 1st century BCE, designed specifically to heat the floors of public baths and wealthy homes. The technology was based on a simple but effective concept. Hot air from a furnace would circulate beneath raised floors, warming the rooms above. This method not only heated the space more efficiently than traditional open flames, but it also allowed for a constant, even distribution of warmth. Beneath the floors, pillars raised the floor tiles, creating a space where hot air could flow freely, keeping the rooms comfortably warm. This clever design was revolutionary for its time, and it allowed the Romans to enjoy a level of comfort that would have been unimaginable for many other civilizations. Yet, despite its brilliance, the hypercourse system eventually faded into obscurity. With the fall of the Roman Empire, many of its innovations, including the hypercourse, were abandoned. The knowledge of this ancient heating method was lost for centuries, as Europe plunged into a period of technological stagnation. Castles, built during the medieval period, often relied on simpler heating methods, such as fireplaces, braziers, and hearths, unable to take advantage of the more sophisticated systems used by the Romans. But the knowledge of the hypercourse was not forgotten forever. By the 12th and 13th centuries, as the medieval period progressed, there was a resurgence in interest in ancient Roman architecture and engineering. Builders and architects in Europe began to rediscover the brilliance of Roman techniques, including the hypercourse. Slowly but surely, the underfloor heating system made its way back into the architectural toolkit, albeit in a new and adapted form that would suit the needs of castles and large stone structures. As medieval architects began to incorporate these ancient methods, the hypocaust system was adapted to fit the unique challenges of castle life. Castles, unlike Roman bathhouses, were vast and often located in remote areas where access to resources like firewood was limited. The challenge for architects was not only to reintroduce the hypocaust system, but to make it more efficient and practical for the colder climates of Northern Europe. Instead of the luxurious bathhouses of Rome, castles needed a heating system that could warm large, drafty rooms with thick stone walls. The medieval version of the hypocaust system was designed with this in mind. Engineers used the principles of the Roman system, heated air flowing beneath the floor, but adapted it for the cold, harsh winters of Europe. The hypocaust's ability to provide a consistent, even heat distribution was just as crucial in castles as it had been in Roman baths, but it had to be scaled up and modified to suit its new purpose. So, in the midst of these medieval castles, ancient Roman genius found new life, offering an innovative way to heat spaces that had previously been nearly impossible to warm. Could this be the key to warmth in medieval castles? As we move forward, we'll see how medieval engineers took this ancient technology and tailored it to fit their specific needs, leading to the next stage of the evolution of castle heating.
Imagine stepping into a room where the floor beneath your feet is warm. Comforting warmth radiates upwards, softly taking the chill out of the air. This wasn't magic, though it may have felt like it. This was the power of the hypocaust system, an ancient Roman technology that was perfected and adapted by medieval engineers to meet the unique challenges of castle heating. When the hypocaust system made its return in medieval castles, it wasn't quite the same as the Roman version. Instead of a luxury for public bathhouses or villas, it was a practical solution for castles built of stone, often located in cold, isolated regions. Medieval castles presented a number of challenges that the Romans hadn't faced. The large, cavernous spaces needed to be heated efficiently, and access to firewood, one of the primary sources of heat, was limited and difficult to transport. It was in these very conditions that the medieval hypocaust system evolved. While the Roman hypocaust was designed to heat relatively small rooms, medieval engineers had to scale up the concept to heat large, open spaces like the Great Hall, where feasts were held and entire families lived. The hypocaust system used in castles would often involve an elaborate network of underground channels that carried hot air from a furnace to various rooms within the castle. These channels were built beneath the floors, allowing heated air to circulate through the stone structure and warm the room above. What made these medieval adaptations so remarkable was the careful selection of materials and the modifications made to ensure maximum efficiency. Medieval engineers learned that by using heat-retaining materials, like thick stone floors and brick, around the hypocaust's underground flues, they could store heat for longer periods. The stone floors would absorb the heat, releasing it slowly throughout the day and night, keeping the rooms warm even after the fire in the furnace had burned down. This heat storage method was especially important during the long, cold winters, when firewood was often in short supply. In some castles, the flues would be designed to radiate heat throughout entire wings of the building. The system was so advanced that some castles had multiple chambers, each connected by intricate networks of underground pipes and ducts, all leading back to a central furnace. These systems could circulate the warm air to large spaces, often heating rooms that were far from the hearth or furnace. The hypocaust system became a sophisticated solution, capable of turning cold, unwelcoming stone rooms into habitable spaces, even during the harshest of winters. But the medieval hypocaust wasn't just about heating, it was also about efficiency. Medieval engineers were keenly aware of the cost of firewood, and so they focused on ensuring that as little wood as possible was consumed. With the hypercourse system, the fire would burn more efficiently, its heat stored and redistributed without the need for a constant blaze. In this way, the hypercourse system in castles became a perfect fusion of ancient knowledge and medieval ingenuity. Imagine stepping into one of these rooms, the floor warm beneath your feet, the air crisp but comfortable, and the heavy stone walls no longer cold to the touch. This was the magic of the medieval hypercaust, a rediscovered technology that not only kept the cold at bay, but allowed the grandeur of the castle to be matched by comfort and warmth. As these systems grew more sophisticated, they paved the way for even more advanced heating methods, eventually becoming the backbone of castle heating in later centuries. In the next chapter, we'll look at how these systems evolved even further, influencing the way castles were designed and how later medieval engineers would take these technologies to new heights. Imagine it's the dead of winter. The landscape outside blanketed in snow, the wind howling around the thick stone walls of a medieval castle. The temperature inside isn't much better. Even with clever engineering, a castle built of stone offers little resistance to the brutal cold that seeps in through the walls. And yet, life inside this fortress, although harsh, carries on. For the castle dwellers, the cold was a constant companion, and how they navigated this daily challenge gives us a glimpse into their resilience and resourcefulness. The central gathering space, the Great Hall, was the heart of the castle, not just socially but practically. It was here that the majority of the warmth was concentrated. The hearth, roaring with flames at the center of the room, was the focal point. This wasn't just for the benefit of the lord and his guests. The Great Hall was the communal space where everyone, lords, ladies, servants, and soldiers, gathered to eat, to talk, and to sleep. The heat radiating from the fire was vital for keeping people comfortable during the harsh winter months. But how did it actually feel to live in such a space? For the inhabitants, warmth wasn't simply a luxury, it was a necessity. The fire in the hearth, although essential, didn't always reach the farthest corners of the room. People had to strategically position themselves near the fire, sometimes huddling together in the warmest areas. Despite the concealed fireplaces, underfloor heating systems, and insulated chambers, the further you were from the heat source, the colder it got. The stone, which could absorb heat, also trapped cold, and the thick walls, perfect for defense, were often too efficient at keeping out warmth. Wood, though precious, was in constant demand. The stockpile of firewood had to be carefully rationed, especially in castles situated in remote areas, where it was difficult to get large supplies. The job of bringing in and storing firewood was a laborious one, often left to the lower servants. The daily rhythm of a castle dweller's life revolved around the fire, gathering wood, tending to the flames, and making sure the heat didn't flicker out. Outside the Great Hall, the temperature quickly dropped. The rooms where the soldiers slept were little better, their beds often arranged around a small, struggling hearth. The kitchens, where servants worked tirelessly to prepare meals, would be warmed by smaller concealed fires. The stone floors, which radiated cold, became unbearable in rooms without direct access to a hearth or underfloor heating. Yet in the kitchens, despite the warmth of the flames, there was no escape from the cold stone, unless you were lucky enough to be near the hearth. What did it feel like to live in such conditions? The warmth was always fleeting, like a living thing, dancing in the hearth before dissipating into the walls, the air, and the stone. The people of the castle would have felt the sharp contrast between the heat from the fire and the chill of the stone. Their lives were built around this ebb and flow of warmth, adapting to the system of fire and heat conservation that kept them from freezing in the winter months. Every blanket and every rug, every choice of position near the hearth or in front of a concealed fireplace,
played a part in this delicate dance with the cold. But the cold wasn't just a physical burden. It was a constant reminder of the fragility of life within these stone walls, of the constant struggle against nature's indifference. The warmth from the hearth, or the secret heat hidden within the walls, was an essential part of castle life, a fleeting comfort in a world of stone, wood, and bitter cold. Yet despite all these efforts, castles remain difficult to fully warm. The technology, although advanced for its time, wasn't perfect, and the cold was never fully conquered. So how did the castle remain a stronghold during such harsh conditions?
How did the very design of the building, its layout, its purpose, affect the way people lived, fought, and survived the medieval winter? As we move on, we'll see how the need for warmth influenced castle defense and how these ancient structures were designed not just to ward off invaders, but also to protect against the dangers of the environment itself, problems that seem far beyond what we might expect from such formidable fortresses.
Imagine standing within the walls of a medieval castle during a brutal winter, where every stone and every structure has been designed to withstand not only the threat of invaders, but also the merciless cold. The cold that creeps in through the cracks in the walls, the cold that seeps into the bones of those who are unfortunate enough to be too far from the hearth. But in this fortress, warmth itself has become a form of defense, just as important as the arrow slits and towering battlements. For the inhabitants of these castles, their very survival depended on their ability to protect the warmth within their walls, as much as they protected their lives from external threats. The medieval castle was designed with defense in mind, yes, but it also had to account for the most basic of human needs: warmth. Castles, with their towering stone walls, were already formidable against enemy attack. But these same walls, so effective at repelling invaders, were also formidable at trapping heat and keeping it inside. The thick stone walls were the first line of defense against the winter cold. While they were designed to withstand battering rams and siege weapons, they also served to insulate the castle from the chill that would otherwise permeate every corner of the space. The placement of windows in medieval castles was another critical feature in maintaining warmth. Medieval windows were narrow, often covered with shutters or even glass, rare and expensive to come by, so as to limit the flow of cold air into the castle. This small, narrow design allowed for defense against the cold, but it also served a defensive purpose against the enemy. Large, easily accessible windows would provide invaders with an easy point of entry, but the narrow openings offered protection while still allowing light and ventilation. In this way, windows served both as a safeguard against the elements and as a physical defense mechanism. The layout of the castle also contributed to protecting the warmth inside. The strategic design of rooms and their proximity to fireplaces or hidden hearths was a vital consideration. The most important rooms, such as the Great Hall, where the lord and his family would gather, were often positioned around the central hearth, ensuring the most important spaces stayed warm. The castle's complex design, its winding corridors and secret rooms, wasn't just a defense against invaders, it was also a defense against the cold. The more enclosed and isolated the rooms were, the better they could retain warmth. These spaces were carefully insulated, sometimes with thick tapestries or layers of stone that trapped heat, protecting not just lives, but the very comfort of the inhabitants. And it wasn't just the exterior of the castle that was fortified. Even the entrances and gates were part of this delicate balancing act of warmth and security. Castles had massive wooden doors, often reinforced with iron, designed not only to keep attackers out, but also to prevent the heat from escaping. In a world where firewood was precious and hard to come by, the last thing a castle wanted was to lose heat through poorly constructed gates. The massive doors, sometimes double, sometimes even triple, created an additional barrier against both invaders and the cold. These thick, fortified gates helped ensure that, when the fire was lit and the castle was warm, the heat would remain inside for as long as possible. So, in this fortress of stone, warmth wasn't just a comfort, it was a shield, a resource that had to be carefully guarded just as much as the people within. In a world where winters could be deadly, protecting warmth meant protecting life itself. The architects of medieval castles understood that. Every stone, every wall, every window, every door was designed with the knowledge that keeping the cold out was just as critical as keeping the enemy at bay. As we move toward the final chapter, we see how the interplay of these ingenious designs, not just for defense, but for survival, showcases the remarkable foresight of medieval engineers. These structures, designed to endure siege and fire, were just as adept at holding off the cold. In the end, they were not just castles of stone and mortar, they were fortresses of warmth, offering refuge to all who sought shelter within. The medieval castles, with their secret fires and ingenious systems of warmth, were more than just fortresses against invaders. They were forward-thinking designs, early masterpieces of sustainability and energy efficiency. The methods medieval engineers used to keep their stone walls warm, to trap and circulate heat in innovative ways, laid the foundation for modern architectural principles we take for granted today. What if the warmth we feel in our modern homes, in our energy-efficient buildings, was influenced by those ancient, cold stone castles? The secrets of medieval warmth didn't just die with the castles. These ingenious systems of heat retention, storage, and distribution became the building blocks for what we now understand as passive solar heating, radiant floor heating, and thermal mass design. Just as medieval architects used thick stone walls to absorb heat and release it gradually, modern buildings often use materials with similar properties, concrete, brick, and stone, that store and release heat throughout the day. This concept, borrowed from the ancient world, helps us keep our homes comfortable while reducing the need for constant heating. The lessons learned in medieval castles, where every crack in the wall had a purpose and every inch of space was utilized, are still relevant in today's green building practices. One of the most significant influences is the practice of utilizing thermal mass in building design. In medieval castles, large stone walls absorbed heat during the day, slowly releasing it when the air grew cold. This principle is now a key element of energy-efficient buildings. Modern homes and offices often incorporate walls or floors made of high-mass materials that absorb the sun's heat and release it later in the evening or early morning when temperatures drop. While today's technologies may have replaced the need for hidden fireplaces or underfloor hypercost systems, the underlying principle of managing heat through the structure of the building remains the same. Radiant floor heating, a system that circulates warm air through pipes or electrical coils embedded in the floor, has its roots in the hypercaust system used by the Romans and later adapted in medieval castles. Though modern radiant floor heating may be powered by electricity or water instead of wood-burning furnaces, the basic idea of warming floors from below to create a steady, comfortable heat was first implemented centuries ago. It's a testament to the enduring ingenuity of medieval engineers, whose designs were so ahead of their time that their influence can still be seen in contemporary practices. These medieval techniques didn't just inspire energy-efficient homes, they also paved the way for sustainable building practices. In today's world, where concerns about climate change and energy use dominate, the idea of designing buildings that work with the natural environment, that store and circulate heat without relying on constant energy input, is more relevant than ever. The castles of old, built in harsh conditions with limited resources, were early examples of sustainable architecture. They show us that the path to energy efficiency is not always new technology, but often the rediscovery and adaptation of old wisdom. Looking at medieval castles through the lens of modern architecture, we see a direct line of continuity. The same principles that allowed castles to survive harsh winters without depleting valuable resources, through careful planning, material selection, and energy management, are the same principles we now apply in our homes and commercial buildings. Castles, once symbols of defense and grandeur, now stand as symbols of how humanity's past has shaped the future of architecture, offering insights into energy conservation and efficient design. As we close this journey,
It's clear that medieval engineers weren't just building fortresses, they were laying the groundwork for the sustainable, energy-efficient structures that would come centuries later. The legacy of their work continues to warm us today, from the ancient stone hearths of the past to the cutting-edge technologies of the modern age. The secrets of medieval warmth, hidden in plain sight, have been passed down through generations, offering us a tangible connection to the past and a hopeful glimpse into the future of architecture.